Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are tonight's entertainment.
Sound good?
Yes, I know who I am.
Did IQs just drop shot while I was away?
I have a plan.
I like this shit.
You know, it's exciting.
Dance off, bro.
It is your
Me and you.
destiny.
Welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast.
Let the games begin.
Hello and welcome to the Atlantic Screen Connection Podcast with Jason and Lee. I'm Jason.
I'm Lee.
And this week we are proud to be accompanied by Mr. NEIL RAMJEE from Filmseekers as we set in to discuss a series of movies in our, not necessarily
Ongoing.
long-standing house cleaning, house cleaning extra episode,
It'll have
filler
a
shit.
name.
Exactly, eventually we'll get to it. So Mr. RAMJEE, how you doing, sir?
Very well. How are yourselves?
Well, I'm always good. Now, don't let Lee talk because then he gets all fumbled up and he's not, So Lee's fine. I'm fine. Everything's good.
You make it sound like we're under duress.
Exactly. We'll
Nobody's
ask
at
Neil to
gunpoint.
just pepper out
Don't think about
explosions
it.
throughout the entire thing.
Mr. RAMJEE, if you want to talk a little bit about your show, where can people listen to Filmseekers? What's it about? Let our audience know a little bit about what you do.
The idea, thank you. So the idea behind Filmseekers is that we explore films across the world. So we're not going after your big hitters, your blockbusters necessarily. So we're trying to go into different parts of world cinema, international cinema, independent cinema, and cinema that perhaps people might have found a bit daunting or challenging before, and try and explore them in kind of basic and simplistic ways. We're not trying to be scholarly, or we're not trying to lecture anyone at all, but we're trying to open some doors to people who have had an interest in film and may now want to go down different avenues. And this is sort of discussing films from Mexico, from India. We talked about The Red Shoes, which is a 1940s British film. And so basically we're just trying to go down all these little kind of scurry holes and just kind of open it up to people and think, there's something else out there other than your whatever you see that's advertised the most when you go to your local cinema. So it's something that perhaps I would have liked to have heard when I was younger, and so I guess I'm catering for an audience that's not catered for in a world full of superheroes and franchises.
Cool. Let's launch into some of the movies. I'm interested in talking about, Neil, you before we there were tweets that you sent out that you were looking forward to talking about this on the show, and we were talking about Mr. Jones's Mute.
Do you know what it is to make your dreams come true, Leo? I've seen you working downstairs. You're a good man. This barman should not punch the fucking customers.
I don't deserve you, Leo. I love you so much, but you don't know me.
I want to know what the deal is with this crazy bartender.
Sure you want our help with this?
This kind of thing hurts my reputation.
Daddy's gotta go. Oh, no soda. Your girlfriend has secrets. You lost, mate? Take a hint and fuck off.
Not very talkative.
Something's going on. You need to maintain a sense of humor, babe. You gonna give me some trouble, big boy? Or are you gonna channel that famous Amish serenity?
Leo, I need to tell you something.
This is gonna stop right now. It ain't a secret anymore. Would you do anything for her? Say you're sorry. Fucking say it! Why the hell can't he talk?
He doesn't need words.
How about you take it away with what you have to say about Mr. Jones's Mute?
there's so much to talk about Mr. Jones's moot. So Duncan Jones, who on the back of his last film, which was Warcraft, which wasn't particularly well received by a lot of people. I know there were certain elements of the critical fraternity who enjoyed that film.
I'll state it out right now that I am a defender of Warcraft.
You are,
yeah. No interest in the series of games whatsoever. I've never played one, but I just it was good to me. It was fine. It just, if you ever look at how like old fashioned fantasy adventure goes down, it was almost exactly like that. All the speech was quite stilted. All the characters were quite grand and verbose and melodramatic, and all the elements of the magic were just basically never developed or understood, and it just went on autoplay for way too long. And I was like, this is kind of like reading one of those Pulp Fiction novels of that genre, and I just I got it, you know. I felt like it was one of the rare times his deft-handed, stilted dialogue really worked.
Okay. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me, and I think that Lee, you obviously know that you're in the minority on this one.
Oh yeah, I was absolutely very clear on that.
It's just you and China that loved the film. And on the back of the success,
pretty significant number.
Well, yeah, there is that. But on the back of the success in China, that's the reason why there's potentially going to be a sequel, because it did huge numbers over there. And I think it's only 29 films get in the English language get released in China every year. So if you manage to be one of those films, then you're laughing essentially. So yeah, Warcraft didn't work for me. I've seen Dungeons and Dragons, this 1998 film with Jeremy Irons and a few other people.
Jeremy Irons one, yeah.
Yeah, it reminded me of that, and I think that's probably one of the worst.
Not an unfair comparison.
It is quite similar. The language is stilted, like you said. A lot of things don't make sense. It's trying to be faithful to its source material, which is steeped in magic, mystery, fantasy. And I think it's such a difficult leap to take from something that isn't necessarily a filmic media and transform it to the big screen. It's such a difficult job to adapt it, basically, and stay faithful to your fan base, who are going to drive audiences in to watch the film, but also make something credible and make something interesting to audiences that have no idea what goes on within the source material. So there is that aspect to it, and both of those, in my opinion, are complete failures. So Dungeons and Dragons and Warcraft just didn't work for me. But going back to Mute, which is the latest film from Duncan Jones, and I guess it's important to say who Duncan Jones is, who is the son of David Bowie.
David Bowie, yeah.
Who recently passed over a few years ago. I can't believe, after watching Mute, that this is the same man who brought me an amazing film such as Moon or Source Code. Both of those films are incredible works of science fiction, I would say. And I think he is adept at being able to make science fiction films for the big screen. And I don't know many people who came away from Moon disappointed. There was sort of a groundswell of interest into engaging and challenging science fiction around 2009 onwards. You had films like Looper, for example, with more challenging themes of science fiction coming through. And I think that Moon formed part of that pantheon, if not was the catalyst for those kind of films to come to the fore. And hence why I really enjoyed that. And even Source Code, his follow-up film with Jake Gyllenhaal, which was all based on a train where things were imagined and within an alternate reality. I think that was executed particularly well. And once again, you had a very strong lead there in Jake Gyllenhaal, and also I believe it was your lady from Up in the Air, Vera Farmiga, who was also excellent in that film as well. So Mute is the story of a mute bartender, and he goes up against the city gangsters in Berlin, and it's a sort of a neo Berlin set maybe 40, 50 years in the future, where there are androids, everything is high tech. It's not too far removed from where we are now, but there are more things that float in the air. You get your food delivered to you by magic app, and it drops it off on your plate. It looks at these little things that go in the, it's very Blade Runner-y, and I think those comparisons are quite fair. It's very grandiose in its sort of world building, and I love a good world building science fiction film. I think if it's done particularly well, you can get really immersed into it. So a couple of recent examples that really worked for me, and you may laugh at this, were from the young adult adaptations of films, and I'm talking about films like Divergent and perhaps The Maze Runner, which took young adult source materials of science fictions or dystopian worlds and made them into a believable future that perhaps we could be living in 40, 50 years, although,
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you that they did a good job world building them, but neither of them are, like, even remotely believable.
Okay. But the point being is that the world building behind both those films are fantastic. You really feel like you're immersed in this living, breathing world. And I would have to say that Mute attempts to do the same thing, but it kind of falls flat, and there are many sequences within Mute, which is, as I said, set in a neo-Berlin, so a futuristic Berlin, populated by people that largely speak English. There is some concession for the German language in there, and I think it's valiant that they kept some of it in, but it's not enough for me to believe that this is Berlin. For all intents and purposes, this is a sort of a cosmopolitan metropolis.
I think that when your characters have to sit down every now and then and re-explain that they are in Berlin, you're kind of it seems every couple of scenes you got Paul Rudd walking out and going, "Oh, any day now I'm getting out of Berlin. That's Berlin I'm in. Berlin, Berlin, Berlin." And you're like, "Oh, okay."
You're 100% right. And the problem with Mute is not just the fact that it has to explain everything to the nth degree every 5 seconds. The problem is that I think it's far too ambitious for what Jones is able to achieve. The whole film is predicated on this very false pretense of this intense, sentimental, as you said, Lee, romantic love at the start of this film. He is infatuated with a fellow worker at this bar who's a drinks girl who goes around with a tray and serves drinks across this whole bar. And she's one of the worst actresses I've ever seen.
Right, so to be fair, I'll say to our audience now, I have seen half of this film. I fell asleep watching Mute and have not yet rallied my efforts to endure the latter half, because right off the bat, I'll just be clear, I didn't enjoy this too. I'm agreeing a lot with Neil that it was much when it comes to world building and characterization and acting as well. It just kept failing to grab me in any real meaningful way. But I don't know how much of this actress's role can be pinned on her inability to deliver. A lot of it felt to me like it was setting her. There was something wrong with maybe the direction that she was being given, because it felt like the entire scene was saying, this is a very strange, demented relationship. There's a lot being unsaid, and they just keep getting cuts of her going, "I have a secret. I'm mysterious," and she has to keep explaining her role. And I don't know how you act that when you're not given a character. You're like, I am a piece of the story that you're going to need to follow to unravel the story. And she's actually telling you her purpose in the plot. And at the same time, you're supposed to be believing this is someone who cares deeply for our main character. I don't know what someone is supposed to do with that. I don't know how you're supposed to make that seem believable when it's not a person, it's not a role that's a real thing, it's just I am an item role. So I don't know how much blame can be levied at her feet,
I think with all due respect to the actress involved, though, English is not her first language, very clearly.
Well, that helps.
But I have seen non-English speaking actresses deliver English language dialogue in a much better manner than she has done throughout the beginning of this film. I can agree,
definitely.
And the fact that the whole film is built up on this love between the two characters, And if that's not believable, then it kind of undoes everything else that goes on throughout the rest of this film. You've got Paul Rudd's in this film. He is essentially, I guess, conflicted bad guy to an extent. He is someone who is ex-military, looking to get some papers to escape from Berlin, because apparently there are lots of people that have abandoned the US Army and are looking to go in underground and escape with their families and whatnot. But for the most part, this film follows Paul Rudd trying to find suitable childcare. That is essentially what the film revolves around. For the second part and maybe the third part of the film, before its very quick denouement, it's just Paul Rudd going, "Can you look after my kid for me?" And she's there just scribbling on bits of paper, and that is all there is. You know, going back to what I was saying about adapting young adult novels for the screen, and I gave the examples of Divergent and The Maze Runner as very good examples as well. In the first couple of films, I think The Maze Runner and Divergent are, in my opinion, very good adaptations of bringing that world to life. The latter parts we can probably forget about. Sure. But I think this probably exemplifies the issues of bringing comic book stories, because that's what Mute is based on, isn't it? It's based on a graphic novel source.
Unaware.
I believe it is a graphic novel source. I could be wrong.
Right, okay.
And there is an issue whereby, Duncan Jones, story by Duncan Jones, whereby this works probably on the page, but has to be done in a different way to make it work as a film. And he's completely failed in his attempt to do this. It's just a bizarre film, and I say bizarre in a lot of people have called this a honorable failure. I don't even think it deserves that moniker at all. Duncan Jones has made two very excellent films, one, in my opinion, very ropey film, and this absolute mess of a film, and it squanders a whole lot of talent. And to be honest with you, I don't think the source material in its original form or in this form that I've seen is adaptable to a decent standard.
This is pretty intense, because I remember seeing just like bits and parts. I saw images, and the images were kind of interesting. I thought it looked interesting. And I think that was the hook for getting me in. And I didn't really bother watching the movie, and I'll be honest why, and this is not going to be as in-depth as Neil just went. I'm not a fan of Paul Rudd. And when I noticed that he was going to be one of the characters in the film, here it goes, cat's out of the bag. I'll just keep going with this. I'm not a fan of John Cusack either, and I figure that Paul Rudd is the new John Cusack. And it's a very sad thing for me to sit through like some of those movies, because I've never thought that John Cusack was actually a good actor. He's just a guy who happened to be at the right place, and he has a career as a result of that. And I know that Mike is right now losing his fucking mind in Kentucky if he's listening to this, going like, because he's a huge John Cusack fan. And I still have to sit down and watch High Fidelity. I saw bits and parts, and I was like, I don't give a shit about mullets. Whatever. And Paul Rudd is another guy that I've always had trouble getting into. But I happen to be, like, I'm one of the only people that really enjoys This Is 40. I really like that movie because of the fact that it seems so raw, so real. A lot of people seem to criticize a lot of what Judd Apatow does as long ass movies and whatnot. And I'm like, yeah, but he just lets everything come to its logical conclusion. You know, he doesn't necessarily have to cut in different places in order to kind of get you involved in the movies. He goes, okay, well, the movie's telling me to go this way, and I'm going to head down that road with it. The same thing happened with Funny People, another movie I think that doesn't get enough recognition, in my opinion. When I saw that Paul Rudd was going to be in Mute, I was like, you know what? He's all right as Ant-Man, but he's never a character. He's always Paul Rudd. There's no believability in any of his performances. And that was going to be one of the things that was going to take me out of the movie anyway, because as soon as he opens his mouth, I'm going to be like, it's Paul Rudd in a science fiction film. What the fuck is this?
Yeah,
and I didn't particularly want to... Yeah, well, exactly. And I didn't really want to put myself through that. I've got nothing against Duncan Jones, and I think Neil really did a good job of explaining why, Moon and Source Code really kind of launched into the new sci-fi. And we got movies like Ex Machina as a result of that as well. Mm-hmm. And I just don't see myself falling for Warcraft. I mean, I just saw a clip of Ben Foster as the fucking wizard. And Ben Foster was just like, Yeah, you know, it's not even chewing scenery at this point because
I totally
there's
forgot
nothing
about
to
Bad
chew.
Boss
You know what I mean?
in the film.
He's just there, like ah, la, la, just
Yeah,
trying to
man.
have this weird
I
accent.
mean, like,
trying to be...
I'll say, like, where 2016, my sort of pat in the back terrible movie, but that I ended up loving anyway, was X-Men Apocalypse Warcraft, was the 2017 edition of it, but it's far less recommendable than X-Men. I'll give it that. I mean, it's because it's far more based in just terrible taste, whereas X-Men was at least a pretty upbeat, pretty fast-paced movie that has a lot of special effects. Warcraft just kind of, it's like 2.5 hours long of people muttering in rooms. Like
Jason, have you seen Avatar?
Yes.
Imagine if the people were green. You've seen Warcraft.
Oh,
that's
Christ.
not fair. Avatar's way worse.
I don't know. I'm not an Avatar hater. I'm just an Avatar like meh. Or if you want to see it that way, I didn't really give a shit about it. It's a movie. Yeah, it happened.
Yeah, hard to argue.
It exists, you know. But with regards to Mute, I'm interested in seeing it now just because of the backlash it got. You know, it's one of those things that I remember. I saw when I saw Neil's tweet about it. I was like, oh shit, this can go one of two ways, but I kind of know a little bit of what Neil likes and doesn't like. And if it's all flash and no substance, Neil's going to just come down hard on it. And just by the tweet, I was like, he didn't like the movie. It's going to be interesting to hear him talk about that. And I mean, I remember seeing it pop up on Facebook. I was reading through, sometimes I like reading the news on the side to see what's going on. And then Little White Lies, it was like Mute is, I don't remember what anyway, and it's like that 1-star review of Mute and whatnot. And so I was like, okay, Little White Lies can be hit or miss with me with regards to their reviews, but when it comes to science fiction, they're pretty spot on most of the time.
I thought you were going to say when Neil is down with science fiction, he's pretty spot on all the time. I thought you were going to give me some props there.
Like, literally, case in point is like Star Wars is semi-science fiction and you hate it. So, I mean, we're not going to give you that.
I don't think Neil doesn't hate Star Wars. He hates the machine behind it. It's very different.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
You know, and I mean, I'm glad there's a machine now because I get more of them, but I think that's what he's talking about is that it eventually will devalue the franchise that's supposedly supposed to be good and why people love it. I understand that it goes too far, but that's why I kind of limit my intake. I have the action figures, I have a toaster, and that's it.
Yeah, you know, there's one action figures, and like you're like that's a nerd, and then toaster is like that's an idiot.
And it's true, and I mean it doesn't even work. You know, you just post it down.
Sorry,
and I told
say
Lee
idiot.
about
I meant sucker.
And but I mean, I was so happy. I was like, hey, look at that! It'll just burn like the rebel crest in the insignia in the toast, and actually it
leaving most of your toast uncooked.
Exactly, that's the part of the toast that remains uncooked. The rest of it is all toasted. And I was like, wow, what a terrible fucking purchase that was. That's $15 I won't get back. But anyway, long story short, Mute looked appealing, but when I kind of started looking at it a little bit deeper and listening to you guys talk about it, and also I think that someone mentioned that this could have possibly been one of those episodes that they could have used for, you know, something. They could have made like a series out of it and maybe spent a little bit more time developing what was going on, because apparently the world itself seems to be interesting. It's just that the characters that inhabit it aren't.
It's like Neil said, on paper, it's bound to work. I mean, it's a good idea. The Neo Berlin, it sounds cool. The look of it is pretty interesting because it's quite seedy, but in a very Eurocentric kind of way. You know, it's something I haven't seen before. It's just not. But I mean, it's not given time to breathe or to. You don't get to inhabit that place at all. You're just there. But
yeah, long story short, I might try to sit through it eventually, but in no time soon. It's one of those things where I'm like, you know what? I just want to see how bad. It's the same thing with Bright, you know, the straight to Netflix Bright. My sister really enjoyed the movie, and she seems to be in there. There is a disconnect between our tastes in terms of, you know, I enjoy movies quite a bit, and she enjoys movies quite a bit, but she collects the Police Academy, and I don't. And so Bright seemed to be a little bit more in her wheelhouse. Is he gone to get the police academies now?
Oh God! There you go. Like now we know definitively where your tastes divide. Neil is just exactly where your sister went and you went the other way.
Exactly. That's the point now.
It's great. We got like the source of
But it was the go-to. Okay, well, I could have said she enjoys movies that have Dolly Parton in them.
If he's going to bring out 9 to 5,
It gets up again. But anyway, so the long story short, when she told me that she liked Bright, I hadn't seen it, and I immediately started to laugh. I was like, "Are you kidding?" Like everyone seems to be like destroying this movie. First of all, I think it's because a lot of people don't like Max Landis, myself included. And I think that a lot of the backlash comes from that. The idea is like, oh, like, fuck you. I feel like there might be an audience out there for Mute eventually, just the same way that there is an audience out there for Bright. I have no idea who that is. I'm maybe looking forward to seeing it because I kind of enjoyed Cloverfield Paradox for what the hell it was, the campy mess that it is. But Mute, every time I hear someone talk about it, it's just a fucking mess. I have no idea how I'm going to figure where I'm going to be in there.
Cloverfield Paradox was a mess, but it was an enjoyably quick and one and done mess, where Mute was kind of disparagingly slow and draining the entire time. And I was genuinely excited when it started to see, because I don't think I've ever fallen asleep during a sci-fi, but this actually happened. So I don't know, man. I am interested in seeing the last half of it because I want to see what, if anything, is made of like the themes.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the payoff that is completely unwarranted. There is barely a payoff at the end of this film, and I think you'd be right to go back and give it your time to watch that final. What's it, hour and a half that you missed? Hour. So I think you'd be right to see it through, and I would put it on a par with films like Bright. As you said, Jason, I think there is an audience out there for people who want very simplistic stories. Right. All three of us have times where we just want to chill out. We don't want to engage too much. We just want to watch something, turn our heads off. Mm-hmm. And by all rights, there is an audience out there who purely want to do that constantly all the time when they watch a film. They don't want to have any deep and meaningful themes underlying. To them, a good film is something that tells a story from beginning to end. They understand what goes on, and there's nothing else to take from that, and that's fine. And Bright is essentially Training Day with orcs, and I think for an audience that wants that sort of thing, easygoing with some plot holes and everything else that they're not going to look into deeply, that's perfectly well. That's filling a gap in the market for people like that who enjoy that sort of thing. And even myself, there will be films like I've just plucked out the Police Academy collection here. They are enjoyable guilty pleasures. I enjoy the Police Academy films. There's no subtext going on. I just enjoy them for what they are, which is great moments of slapstick humor. Police Academy holds a little bit of my heart in the 90s, where I was a teenager and I enjoyed watching these films as part of my escapism. This is pre-American Pie, sort of slightly smuttier and maybe even slightly more cynical sort of era, pre-internet era, where there wasn't all this stuff that we were exposed to. And so Police Academy was my way to watch people get mace sprayed under their arms, and women get their boobies popped out, and all the rest of it. And it was funny because I was a teenager, and that appealed to me.
So you're saying Mute is the Police Academy of sci-fi films?
Jesus.
Not at all. But I would say that it's no deeper or meaniful than Police Academy. So there we are.
That's a very fair, I would say incredibly fair statement.
But anyway, so I wanted to move on, seeing as that we all wanted to talk about like specific movies. This was the one that I hadn't seen, but I know that all three of us have seen Ladybird.
I hate California. I want to go to the East Coast.
I want to go where culture is, like
How
New
in the
York,
world did I raise such a
or at least
snob?
Connecticut or New Hampshire, where writers live in the
Get
woods.
into those schools anyway.
Mom,
You should just go to City College. With your work ethic, just go to City College and then to jail and then back to City College, and then maybe you'd learn to pull yourself up and not expect everybody to do everything.
Ladybird, is that your given name?
Yeah.
Why is it in quotes?
I gave it to myself. It's given to me by me.
Ladybird always says that she lives on the wrong side of the tracks, but I always thought that was like a metaphor. But there are actual train tracks.
What she did was very baller. It was very anarchist.
Put the magazine back!
She has a big heart, your mom.
She's warm, but she's also kind of scary.
You can't be scary and warm.
I think you can. Your mom is.
So, you're not interested in any Catholic colleges?
No way. I want schools like Yale, but not Yale because I probably couldn't get in.
You definitely couldn't get in.
Does Mom hate me?
If you're tired, we can sit down.
I'm not tired.
You were dragging your feet.
You are so infuriating.
Please stop yelling.
I'm not yelling. Oh, it's perfect.
Do you love it?
You both have such strong personalities.
When is a normal time to have sex?
You're having sex.
I'm ready. Just wanted it to be special.
Why? You're gonna have so much unspecial sex in your life.
We're afraid that we will never escape our past.
Whatever we give you, it's never enough. It's never enough.
It is enough.
We're afraid of what the future will bring. We're afraid we won't be loved.
You can't do anything unless you're the center of attention.
We won't be liked.
Yeah, well, you know your mom's tits, they're totally fake. She made one bad decision at 19. 2 bad decisions.
And we won't succeed.
I want you to be the very best version of yourself that you can be.
What if this is the best version? What I'd really like is to be on Math Olympiad.
But math isn't something you're terribly strong in.
That we know of yet.
And I haven't had a chance to talk about Ladybird, and I really wanted to get your opinions on it. I remember talking to Lee a little bit, and he said he had a few issues with it. I really, really adored it, and I saw that you reviewed it, Neil, and you had more than a few issues with it. And I wanted to get you guys' take on it, because I have mine in terms of a review format, but I'm coming at it from a different place than you guys. Because I'm seeing it not only as the kid I was, I'm also seeing it as the parent who's probably going to be heading into it and having a daughter somewhat like that. And so,
well, I mean, if you're the one leading and it's going to be a more positive take, you should be setting the groundwork for us to be chipping away.
All right,
at.
fine.
So take it away.
It's like, you let us take you down, Jason. This is exactly
yeah,
what
please. After you.
I was a little apprehensive, sitting down to watch this one because of the praise. Everyone was like,
hype.
This is really, really
absolutely.
fucking good. But I gotta be honest with you, when I started watching it, I was like, oh man, this is so good. It's very clever. It does play on a little bit of nostalgia for me, obviously, growing up in that period in time. But at the same time, I kind of identified with her, not only her, but her friend as well. Julie Stephens, which I think she's called, who's played wonderfully by Beanie Fendelstein. I thought Ladybird herself, the idea that she's trying to fit in, was really something that I'm living as a parent, but also lived as a child, where you don't necessarily know how to act, especially growing up. Like I tend to talk about quite a bit when growing up in a French community as an Anglophone, you kind of stick out like a sore thumb as well. Even if you know the language, you're still labeled as the English guy, and so trying to make your way in navigating, friendships and trying to be part of the popular crowd and all that stuff is still something that I look to and be like, oh man, I still don't know how I could have managed to get into that crowd. And I'm reliving it now as a parent and seeing my young daughter try to figure out how the fuck to get into these groups and being like having that, how can I put it? The knowledge that I have now as well, we'll call it immature adult. I try to tell her it doesn't really matter because it gets better. Everything's going to be fine. I also understand the aspect of wanting to get away from the hometown. She just wants to get away from Sacramento. And growing up in a small town, 27,000 people, I understand what she means when she wants to go where culture is. It's still something that I aspire to. I live in Quebec City and I still feel sometimes that there is no real culture here. No matter how much people tell me that there is a very much Quebec culture, I never identified with it. And it's not something that's ever interested me anyway. However, I mean, the culture here is hockey and snowmobiles. That's basically what it is. And I have no...
I could have told you that about anywhere in Canada.
But, I mean, I can't skate and I don't own a snowmobile. I do other things. I do this, you know. However, looking at it, I also understand that it's an idealization of other locations. You know, when you look at it from a very narrow perspective as a child, you're like, it's probably going to be better elsewhere. And that's all. The grass is always greener on the other side. You know, and so I figure that even now, myself being in Quebec City, I'm like, you know, I really have to get out of here. I have to go away. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris, you know, the idealization of time periods where you're like, maybe you just don't fit in because you're choosing not to a certain extent. And I figured that Ladybird, the way that she's trying to do it is like, she wants to fit in, but she's constantly in the front, the way that her hair is, you know, the way that she chooses to kind of present herself in this aggressive way. It felt so much like I was at that point in time. But then when I shift it and I see how her parents are dealing with it, and I kind of identified a lot with Tracy Letts in this case, because something happened to me at work as well, where he loses his job in the film. And it's one of those things that must be so worrying as a parent, where you're like, how the fuck am I going to provide for my family? And I mean, last year that happened to me. Someone put my job at risk, and I'll forever be wary of that person because I still think that he's one of the most disgusting individuals that I've ever met. He's a rat fuck. I know he doesn't listen to the show, so I couldn't care less. I won't name him. But, you know, I have to just kind of grin and bear it every time because his office is not too far away from mine. And he put my job in jeopardy, and no matter how much he says that I did it, because apparently I wasn't living up to his standards, but he's just another teacher. He's not part of the administration who would have had a say if I was doing a bad job. You know, this guy in the movie was laid off. I almost lost my job because of someone's opinion, which is fucked up when you think about it. That because he knows where to stick his tongue up the administration's ass, then I was put under a magnifying glass for a year. That was one of the most stressful experiences that I had to go through, because I had to sit there with my girlfriend and try to explain to her, I don't know what to do if ever I lose this job, because I don't know what I'm really good at. I'm not necessarily a good teacher, but I know what I'm talking about when I'm teaching the material. And so that was kind of one of the things where I was like, fuck, I can understand where Ladybird is coming from because it's exactly what I live. But I'm also looking at Tracy Letts' character and I'm like, fuck, this is exactly what I almost lived. You know, I can't put myself in the position where I'm like, oh man, how do you cope with that? And then you have Laurie Metcalf's character, who's absolutely fantastic. And I find my rhetoric kind of resembling hers sometimes, where I'm like, well, you guys don't know how lucky you have it. And then you try to really constantly be a good parent, but at the same time, you have to respect what your values are. But at the same time, you don't necessarily listen to what your kid's saying when you should, as opposed to talk. You know what I mean? And so it was all a little bit too real for me, where I was just sitting there and going like, oh my God, it's like showing a mirror to all of the experiences that I had. And it wasn't necessarily in terms of nostalgia, but I felt like I was watching a life lesson right in front of my eyes. And being able to take it in as it was going on was really heartwarming for me, because not only was I told that it was okay to be the way I was when I was a kid, but that the challenges that I'm facing as a parent are also okay. And it's the way that I choose to deal with them that are going to be a little bit more rewarding for me in a maturity level as I choose to move on. And so Ladybird is so rich for me as a movie, because there's so many aspects of my personality that I could see in that. And it's very rare for me to get that from a movie. And so, you know, even like one of the moments that I thought was really great was the Dave Matthews scene in the car when she's with Timothée Chalamet, who I don't know if it's a good performance. I don't know if I like him as an actor. I don't really, you know, I don't know if it's just there. But he was such a fucking pretentious prick in this movie that maybe he did that much of a good job that I was like, I know that guy. I don't like that guy. And then when Dave Matthews Band's Crash comes on, and she says, I like this song. And I was like, I like that song too. There was one of the things that always been a peeve to me is that how much Dave Matthews, like everyone shits on him for being very literal in whatever his lyrics are, but they don't look at the music and how complicated it is at most times. And I always have really enjoyed the Dave Matthews Band. And I don't know if it's because he's white trash. I don't know if I have no idea.
No opinion.
I just have to separate the music from the artist, I guess. I don't know. I've never really read any tabloid shit. I know he drank a lot and he came from Charlotte. I have no idea exactly. But I've always kind of enjoyed the rhythm, the music that it got, because it got me going. I had a good feeling to it. And so that little moment in time where she was actually be able to not necessarily... she was honest with herself as opposed to playing a game. I thought that was a very interesting turning point, the same way as when she decides to not call herself Ladybird at the end and call herself Christine. She's kind of just shedding the persona and growing up a little bit. And I thought that was kind of interesting because there's a part of me that still has to do that. And to be able to see it in such a young, good female character was like, well, if she can do it, so can I. And so I think that Ladybird speaks a lot to me because I got so much from it that I couldn't see any flaws in it. And I understand why it's getting that praise for me personally, anyway. So that's my bit on Ladybird.
I mean, that makes sense to me. It's also, I'll be clear in saying that I'm absolutely of two minds about this film, but I think what you're saying has a lot to do with why I went a different direction and a more negative direction is because of that personal effect. So, and then I have to then give it praise on top of the fact that I also think it's a really well put together and really well told story that I think does naturally invite you to bring yourself to the film.
Yeah.
That's exactly why these opinions will always come charged or different, is because it reminded me a lot of Sing Street, that the more of yourself you give to it, the more you get back out of it. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of coming of age kind of stories, is that, people will always see a little fragment of themselves here and there, and depending on whether it's the part they like or the part they hate, and how much that part is challenged or changes during the film, they're always going to come out of it with a very personal opinion. So when you come at this and go, I seen a lot of myself in this film, I also seen a lot of experiences that I've been through, maybe a little later than Ladybird's age, not much later than, she's like 21 in this film. So I mean, like maybe the last 2-3 years after that. What I mean is, I think the film does really well at explaining like parental guilt on an accessible level. I think that the film's very kind of poppy. It's very quick edited. There's lots of humor in it. It's very comedic at times, and it's also quite sad when it needs to be. And to me, like if you look at all of it in one like clean page, it reads as a tragedy. And maybe that's just that's more to do with how I perceive those kind of changes. But that maybe the fact that Ladybird kind of loses the fight, I read that as something of a tragedy. Maybe just reflects more on how I perceive those fights. But and in those cases, again, that's what I mean. Like, I can't fault the film itself for that, I can't say, I think the film is genuinely great, and then where I come from in a different way, I have to just be clear and put an asterisk on it and say it's because of where I'm coming from in relation to me from the film. And it's got this great heightened nature to everything that kind of complements the general connective tissue of it, that emotion, everything kind of just, it feels kind of melodramatic, and that helps everything register with the audience. And I guess that's a big deal with why a lot of people really, really like this film, is because everything is just heightened enough that you're getting like scenes where Ladybird jumps out of a car, and scenes where the mother is dead silent to her when she's yelling at her face, asking for her to be heard. These are things that, for a film that is mostly semi-realistic, these heightened elements make it a little more artistic, I guess, but also melodramatic in a sense where people can see the general nature of it and get something from it. And that's what I think, Jason, you mean a lot. A lot of what you were talking about is themes of the film, and these like unspecified battles that are just in the narrative but not necessarily addressed. Things like fighting against the town based on like where your stance is with your parents and all that. She's not literally make a statement going like, I have this hair because I hate this town, that doesn't happen. But it's the general thing it draws out of you and the generalness of it that really people, I imagine, connect with. And I think that the melodrama in it kind of helps elevate that. But the thing that that really like stops me from loving it is that it is that relationship between the mother and daughter that I think is heightened to the point where it kind of almost skews it too hard, and to the point where it kind of glosses over how dangerous that relationship is, right? So I mean this only in a sense that I experienced this, right? Maybe firsthand and secondhand, mostly secondhand. But what I'll say is that from my experience, that relationship where this mother has a guilt and controlling level over your life, right?
Yeah.
It's and you're struggling at that age to deal with how that burrows into your mindset and all. It kind of because of what I've experienced, I ended up taking that portion of the story incredibly seriously against like where it's kind of a dramatic downbeat when it's on. Against like the general mishappy fucking poppy story, the worst scenes are always with the mother and the daughter. Each time I was like, I hate this because it's too real, but it's also not real enough. You know, it's too Hollywood sheen over the fact that this is a deliberate character. This is a person who is deliberately manipulating someone in a very vindictive nature to try and get something out of them that has nothing to do and doesn't consider anything to do with what they want. And that would be a fine story. I think for the most part I bared with it because I thought it was okay. You know, I thought like it's one of many stories, and the majority of the story is really about how Ladybird just doesn't fit in anywhere, like as you were saying. That makes more sense to me, but it's at the very end. Guess it's kind of a spoiler, so I'll preface that spoiler, but
we always spoil shit, man. Why are you worried now?
Yeah, fuck. The issue is that it gives a lot of scenes of that person kind of showing some regret off screen, or not off screen, but out of the dialogue between her and her daughter. We see a lot of her breaking down, reconsidering her actions, looking to be consoled by her husband. As if she knows at a point she's done a terrible thing, but that's not how people like that actually work, you know? Behind the closed doors, they don't get a moment of gravitas and grief, you know? The decisions of a person who functions on that high level of guilt in a family there's no point. They'll question what they might be doing from time to time, but they don't go sobbing into the arms thinking, what a monster am I, you know? They don't hide their secret guilt letters to get their daughter's forgiveness, because in real life it's very dangerous to assume that comes from a place of regret. And a lot of people like that, especially in my experience, have been not in any way looking out for the person, but are just looking out for themselves. They're very selfish people. To see that get like a kind of pat in the back, oh, I'm sorry, you know, deep down she's really just trying to look out for her, is bullshit. And it
I'm gonna call bullshit on that a little bit too, though.
But this is what I mean, right? This is not a total clause, but I have numerous experiences of this exact thing, and when I'm coming from my own experience of this, I'm looking at it and I'm
Makes
going,
sense.
This is not okay. And so when Ladybird loses the fight and kind of regrets moving out, which is a totally natural thing, it doesn't have to be essentially about how the mother breaks her down for the letters, but that's what follows after the breaking down from the letters. I'm angry at the film for not making this more about what Ladybird wants and making it too much about what the mother manages to achieve at the end. And that's why I look at it like a tragedy, right? And that, and another level, makes me think, well, that's just good writing. You know, that's kind of accurate, because this is what would happen. The daughter could be broken down like that. But in the nature of the narrative, and from my perspective of it, I just can't get past just how miserable and defeatist this made me feel. And that's why I can recommend the film, but I can't watch it again. Put it that way, you know? And that's where my negativity comes from, because it's not just a tragedy, but it feels like it's based on a level that it kind of misses a lot of what is actually going on in that relationship when it's trying to be too general to keep a story going. And that's fine, but it's very, to me, I was taking it seriously as if it were the story. And when you see that doesn't get the closure you expect from numerous cases in real life and then your own experience, you're going, I cannot give it the thumbs up I want to give it because I don't feel it myself, you know?
Right.
And so that's where my negativity really comes from on it.
Before I let Neil come back in then, because I want his impressions on it as well, I wanted just to touch on what you said. You know, I think that's probably a deterrent in the movie itself then, that it's going to play differently for different people. You know, because to me, the guilt that you're talking about is one that I feel, that I have, that I kind of hypocritically live with. And then I have to constantly course correct. And I have I actually sit down and I talk to my girlfriend. I said this, I did this. What the fuck? You know, and why did I do that?
That's a different guilt though. That's what I'm saying. The character we're seeing here is not self-aware like you are, even to some degree.
You don't think so? Why does she run back at the end, man?
That's what I mean. That's a cop-out. That's a sellout of that character, because up until then, we've seen her only use manipulative and vindictive nature, that they're building up someone who has basically kind of got a condition of guilting, you know, like it's a system, an addictive system that you're in. And those people, in real life, that system doesn't turn around at some point and go, oh, suddenly I realize I'm in the wrong.
But I think that she knew she was wrong all along.
No, but you can't. That's what I'm talking about. These people in real life, if it's going to a realistic thing, if this story is built on, and you see it throughout the thing, how strong she is compelled to be this guilty, horrible person who uses her daughter. And we see it at its most. This scene, the ending where she comes back around, comes after she freezes her daughter when she's yelling in her face for help. That's what we're seeing. They're seeing somebody who can literally burrow so deep inside to the levels of guilt that she can actually make a new excuse of how not to feel about guilty about it. That's what I mean. And that's how those people work. And from first-hand experience, I know that's how they work. And
I get it. I just think that the first-hand
doesn't give you. But I mean, the thing with the characterization is that if we had seen tidbits here and there laced throughout, that there was an underlying motive, an underlying compassion that was having to be suppressed to let this person be guilty, you know, and we see this break down at the end after being led up to believe that maybe it's there, but it's never going to happen. Then I would be like, that's fine. That's a different person to the one we're seeing, though. The one we're seeing is somebody who is on a compulsive level a manipulative person, and they're not going to find self-awareness in a Hollywood finale. And that's where I come up, because that's not real, even to the point where the film wants to be real, you know? That's having your cake and eating it too. And it's not the same.
I'll disagree with you for that. I can't agree. I accept your explanation. I can't agree for myself personally, just for the reason why that she decides not to continuously call her Christine. She calls her Ladybird. She is sympathetic.
Oh, but she does that in social scenarios. It's a manipulative thing. You see it. She doesn't. It's an appearance thing.
No. She's sitting in the bathroom. In the bathroom when their father's there, when she's in the washroom,
when her
on
father's
the toilet,
there.
But I mean, it doesn't matter. She doesn't call her Christine. She says, "Why don't you use your name?" You know what I mean? I think that there's a jealousy. To me, that's the way I see it. I think that there was a jealousy that she couldn't have the balls that Ladybird has. You know what I mean? She doesn't have the tools necessary to kind of accept that Ladybird has the opportunity to do all these things, to express herself in that way. And that
the
comes
modus
from
operandi
being...
that you want, the motivation behind the character. That's fine. It's a different topic to what's being portrayed, though. You know, it's more about the impact than the reason. You know.
All right, I want to get Neil on this, and I know that Neil. Well, we'll see. You know, I won't give away how he felt about it, but I want your take on this as well. You know, I don't know. Okay.
Well, I've kind of listened to both of you there, and obviously, Jason, I understand where you're coming from. You know, from both perspectives, Jason Lee, this is a very personable film that we can all agree on, I guess. And Lee, you've had experiences where these characters' actions and their motivations don't match up to the things you've experienced in real life. And Jason, in your case, where you are in a very similar position to when you're in a very similar position to the teacher who's let off, having daughters yourself who are growing up and are displaying these traits that Ladybird is doing so in the film, and having a relationship with adults that are tempestuous and rebellious, and that's expected of teenagers, but done in a much more nuanced and I guess realistic way, and this I guess this want of the screenplay to be realistic and yet have these flights of fancy at the same time, throwing yourself out of cars, having these miraculous sort of come-togethers and resolutions. Don't there's two dichotomies there, and they don't marry up for me. They made I don't have children. I don't know young girls who are going through this stage in their lives. I don't have that exposure to it, so perhaps this is a blind spot for me. But someone, equally, I don't know someone who can fly through the air and has laser beams coming out of their eyes. But the difference there being is that those sort of films aren't trying to be realistic in their portrayal, whereas Ladybird wears its credentials writ large on its arms. It wants to be a realistic portrayal of the tumultuous times that a teenager is going through. And for me, to get into the head of Saoirse Ronan's character of Ladybird, Christine, whatever you want to call her by the end of the film, it's largely uninteresting for me because I don't have a grounding in which to base myself. I know of people growing up who are like Ladybird, who are the quirky, attention-seeking, standoffish, bad-tempered girls, and I know what happened to them through my experience in real life. I'm not saying this is obviously a hard and fast rule, but for the majority of those people, I know, they're trying to be cool and they don't get it right all the time, and they're shown up at certain events and they're rebelling against their parents who are very liberal parents. And I would say probably liberal parents for the time as well, because what time scale is this being played out on? But late 90s, early...
This is late 90s, 2000s? Early 2000s, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I didn't know many parents who were like that. And I think I've spoken about this on my podcast, that we live in an enlightened age. 2018, where we are now, we have much more acceptance of people who have mental health issues, people who have different sexualities that perhaps were less accepted 13, 15 years ago during the time in which this film was played out. So to me, yes, there may have been parents who were very progressive and libertarian, but the way that the two interact, so Laurie Metcalf as the mother and the way that she interacts with Saoirse Ronan, the daughter, is highly unrealistic for me. A large part of this is, for me, that Saoirse Ronan's character smacks of this snarky teenager that it's just really uncomfortable, unwarranted, uninteresting company for the majority of the time. I'm like, I hope she gets what's coming to her. I hope there's some sort of...
Oh, wow.
I hope that... Seriously, I
loved her
hope
so
that
much.
there's something that some tragedy or something will come and grab her by both arms and give her a shake and say, this is not how the world works, Unfortunately, you can't have everything you want. You should be able to have everything you want, and I'm all for that. But unfortunately... the world conspires against us, and I think that we all feel that in our lives, where we think that we're living in this perfect life, when in actual fact we're probably out of step with the general majority of the people in which we live in. Really, our society, we feel slightly left of center. And we'd like to think that we speak for the majority, but we don't. And the thing that kind of exemplified this was that I have access to the monetary figures of films, so I can see exactly how much money that certain films have taken on any given night, thanks to some secret stuff that I can't really talk about. But I've looked at the first week of Ladybird opening in the UK. More people went to go and see 50 Shades in its third week, and to me, that says to me exactly what I need to know about people like Ladybird is that the fact that that is not, as progressive as that may be, it's a very quiet voice in a void of people who want to see Jamie Dornan take his top off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I get that.
There is
mean,
a drinking
obviously...
problem in the UK.
And I am part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I get it to an extent. There's definitely, I mean, you got to look at the demographics that are seeing these films anyway. I mean, there's definitely brand recognition's always going to come over some fucking Oscar
of course,
winner
yeah.
Anyway.
It's unfair of me to compare a commercial film
them,
versus.
But I get your point. You know, a lot of people are not going to see themselves at all in Ladybird because a lot of people are very straight and narrow. By majority, they will be nowhere near as standoutish as this character, and that in itself might lead people to wonder why they want to spend time with someone who in their real life they were never planning to spend time with anyway. And everybody does know somebody a little bit like Ladybird in that they call attention to themselves in their teenage years, maybe as a desperate cry for, you know, some sort of attention to their life at that point, or maybe just because they have nothing better to do. It depends. I mean, I think the film makes a good case in saying that this character has pros and cons in her life. Like, she does have opportunities ahead of her, and she is on some occasions making more of an issue out of things than need be. She does have a pretty demanding family life. She does have a pretty constraint social demand from her parents, which require her to be somebody she can't be. And so you do kind of, I think, are supposed to rationalize that. But if you can't rationalize that, then obviously you're not going to enjoy the film, and that makes sense. And if we're all going into this with like our opinions, our takes, our experiences, and then your experiences, the people that you know like that have never ever warranted the interior eye that Ladybird somewhat demands, then it makes perfect sense to me why you wouldn't want to try and establish a relationship with a character that you've seen a million times in real life and know rightly doesn't have that much going on to complain about as Ladybird does. And so it makes sense to me as a write-off, I suppose.
Precisely that, exactly that. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, is it's a very personal film, and you're right, it does depend on your experiences during life, and can you relate to this character, can you not relate to this character. At the end of the day, I just see her as a typical teenager who's rebelling, who's struggling getting into adulthood with views on the world of which are not commensurate with perhaps those things that are around her, but is trying to, I don't know, make a stand, make herself important, you know, be a person in her own right. And it's something I've seen many a time before, and I've just seen it done in more relatable ways. What problems does Ladybird really have at the end of the day? It's really middle class white people's problems. There is no sort of abuse going on. Could be a factor that you may elicit some sympathy for, but what does Ladybird really have to complain about? She has a suburban life, very comfortable. Her dad's just been laid off, but okay, you know, he doesn't really want to go back into teaching. If he was that hard up for money, he could go and clean some toilets. You know, there are those things.
I guess the field of vision is quite small.
Very much so, and
I don't appreciate that as a knock on the film.
Away.
One of my favorite comedians is Doug Stanhope, and it's one of the things he says very obnoxious things, obviously, but at the same time he has there's one sentence that keeps coming back to me when I was listening to when I hear opinions like that, where I'm like, well, you know, what do white people have to complain about? Nothing. Okay, I get it, nothing. But the thing is that to them it's very real. You understand? No matter what, there is a problem that is... Ladybird feels like she has a problem. Even if her problems, if you compare them to other places, maybe they're not real to other people. But I remember Stanhope...
It's relative. Yeah, I get that.
Stanhope once said, "How does your shit make my shit less shitty?" I'm still feeling my shit. You know what I mean? I'm not going to look to what people are feeling and be like, well, at least I'm not them. That's a comparative level that you're not supposed to necessarily be taking. And there is a rhetoric right now in movies, like, well, white people have had it easy. And I'm like, I completely agree. I get it. I get that these are first world problems. But there's still her problems. There's still things that she's dealing with. There's still things that she's struggling with in her head, who she identifies with. And I understand that that's a privilege to have to wrestle with identity as opposed to food. I get it. And there are some articles that you can read out there where people are like, well, you know what? White people are so privileged that they make up shit to complain about and have trouble with. And I'm like, yeah, I 100% agree with that as well. But what's the problem with that?
So it's not necessarily white people. It's more to do with class, actually. It's middle class problems. And these are problems that make me unsympathetic to Ladybird's character. Ladybird is clearly a very intelligent young woman. And surely she has some view outside her own narrow life view, on her periphery, that actually these mean little in a wider context. And that kind of pushes me away from her character even more. It makes me feel like she's quite selfish. Yes, our problems are all relative to ourselves. And yes, they may seem, because they're so personable, they may seem like the worst things in the world ever. But it takes an incredibly stupid person not to be able to see the wider context of your problem within the world. And for her not to be able to see that, or even allude to the fact that my problems, hang on, I can't go to LA, I'm stuck in this small town, and, I have a really bad relationship with my mother and all the rest of it. There are bigger things going on in the world. And the fact she never even acknowledges that, regardless of how important she feels her issues are, it just makes me feel like she's an incredibly selfish or stupid character.
Okay, but I mean, teenagers have a very narrow.
But she's not a teenager. She's 21.
I mean, it wasn't okay, but I mean, even then, I think that at 20, I teach roughly around that age right now, and they have a very narrow perspective on what's going on, to be honest. And I mean, I'm pretty sure that if I go back to 21, I'm very self-involved at that age. I don't know
I'm sure
about worldly events.
I'm sure we both were. And but the world's moved on, Jason. When we were that age, we weren't exposed to the internet. We didn't have all these social issues coming into our life. We didn't have Twitter. We didn't have Facebook. We weren't, having these narratives brought into our lives.
And at the same time, this movie takes place roughly around 1996, which is smack when I was 16 years old, where the internet wasn't necessarily that prevalent. When you wanted to actually download a song, you were happy if it took an hour. It's not 2 this time for that 5 megabyte song. You know what I mean? And so I think that Ladybird is probably not necessarily, I'm not saying that, they're going back in time probably to say, well, at least like the problems.
Dodge the problems.
Exactly. They dodge the problems when it comes to that stuff. And I completely agree with you that, even with the internet, but I mean, like I said, right now I am teaching this generation of kids, and the internet to them is not much. It's the first page on Google. It is Facebook and Snapchat, perhaps Instagram on occasion. Twitter is for old people. And that, I'm not kidding, man. This is based on a random, like, hands up, hands down survey that I conducted in class. So extremely scientific. And the thing is that they don't know what to look for, to be honest. The thing is that I think that the kids today are actually more lost than we were lost. We didn't have the information, but now they have an abundance of information. It's gone completely the other way, that we didn't know what to look for, but they don't know where to look. And that's kind of one thing is that we're going from one lost generation to the next lost generation, where any petty problem you have is going to be a mountain to climb because you have an infinite number of possibilities of where you can go, but you don't know where to start because the parents that you have can't guide you because they're still lost. You know what I mean? And so
100% agree. 100% agree.
And that's what I kind of got from Ladybird, is that you have a mother who's still lost, who's still trying to figure out why the fuck she is who she is. You have a father that's like, well, I kind of identified with this, but now they've told me I can't anymore. So he's in a position where he has to redefine who he is as an individual based on the job that he might get. He sees his son go in to get the same job as him, and he's like, they've replaced me. This is the younger generation. I am no longer relevant. And then you have Ladybird in the mix of all that, trying to find out where she fits in terms of relevance, and at the same time, The teacher that she has, she's like, whatever. Even he loses the grades at one point. That's how lost that motherfucker is, too. And she's trying to navigate the social classes of high school, which seem like nothing because it is kind of a privilege to go to school, even if it's community. And at the same time, I still feel that no matter how much, even the Timothée Chalamet's character is lost as hell. He's the guy that's going to be working in a place that he doesn't want to. We can see that was who her brother was at that age. You know what I mean? We see those different generations. And you see the brother actually going in to get the job. And then Timothée Chalamet is going to probably be that brother again going in to get the job from the other old dude. You know, they're just going to kind of keep changing places. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that finding a place where you fit in, eventually it's not even finding out where you fit in. It's where fitting in becomes the only place that you can go. And so I figure that Ladybird in this case for me is that all she wants is a little guidance and she's not really getting it.
But then surely the fault lies with the parents in this case because they're
100%. That's what psychology tells us. Blame your parents.
Okay, well, her parents are too laissez-faire, and throughout this film, I had very strict parents. I don't know about you two guys, but just wanted their mum to give her a fucking slap round the back of the fucking head and say, sort your shit out. Because that, as much as I'm not into abusing children or anything, but I think a bit of forcefulness behind the parenting would have helped. And I dread to think, what an even more liberal parentage from that age would look like today. That's my
it is a very good cop, bad cop relationship because you can see that her father really wants to kind of care. But at the same time, when you look at it, he might be a little bit closer to his daughter as opposed to his son. And his son is a little bit closer to the mother in this case, which is a typical familial dynamic. You don't necessarily want to replace your father and whatnot, but the daughter is always going to remain a daughter. There's a saying that goes with that. But I don't know. I understand like the slap, I had my share of spanks on the ass and a couple of whacks on the back of the head and stuff like that. But to be honest, it's not something that I'd necessarily want to do to my kids because it didn't really teach me anything except be scared of dad.
I think that the film does make a point of saying there has to be a healthier middle ground than
I get that.
Guilt includes. Two parents warring against each other. One just trying to edge small victories of freedom against a all-dictating, guilt-using mother who kind of...
There's the church, too, in there that we could bring in for guilt.
And of course that's where most of that comes from. And if you want to go into motivation, there's that. But, I mean, I get it. The Ladybird is in an environment that her choices do seem black and white. And if it does skew to some sort of realism... in that it presents it to her like that, even if the world is bigger. But then it also makes sense that why should you care if you know better? In Neil's perspective, it's like so. Basically, the takeaway from this discussion is everyone's got their own shit. They watch this film, and they come out of it with their own shit. Although a little either more angry or, in Jason's case, elated.
I guess that would be one way to put it. I mean, there's one of my favorite scenes, that has to do with like being watched or judgment in some sense. It's when Ladybird is actually sitting there with her friend Julie. They're in the church and they're eating the hosts directly from the jar, and the shots from above. It's like God's watching them like, what the fuck are you doing?
Oh, yeah,
I just love that shot because there is a judgment, there is a guilt that's had to be had, and they're just eating it. You're not supposed to eat those things. And when the nerd comes in, she's like, you're not supposed to be eating. We all know that kid. You know what I mean? There's part of me that was that kid, and part of me that was the Beanie Feldstein, and there was a part of me that was like Ladybird. So I don't know. It's a beautiful amalgamation of everything. For me, anyway, I understand.
Cool.
You guys all made valid points. I completely understand everything that you guys are saying. For some reason, though, it really kind of got me. I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I love this.
That's the personal aspect,
I get
that's
it.
what's driving each of us, and that's why we're at a consensus to agree to disagree.
All right, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, man. But I mean, this is a good discussion. I like this. This is great.
We've clearly had very different upbringings, and that's clearly influenced
that is
and flavored
more clear than ever.
Oh yeah. Definitely, this is great. Cool. I'm satisfied with that conversation. I don't think we should go any farther with that unless you guys want to keep, just poking away at Ladybird, but I think we covered pretty much everything we needed to cover with the film.
I think,
No,
yeah.
that's cool.
All right, cool. Well, I want to say thank you to Neil again. He's stayed on way longer than he was supposed to, and that's a testament to how awesome this guy is. So I want you guys to go listen to the Filmseekers podcast. Neil, how about you tell us where we can find that again?
You can find us on iTunes by typing in Filmseekers. It's all one word. Antonyms are the best things. And you can also find us on filmseekers.com, where we put up competitions, reviews of certain films. I have the privilege of being able to see films before they are released, so you can get the jump on certain films before you waste your time on them, such as Mute. So there we are.
Awesomeness.
Great. And any Twitter or social media that you're pushing out there? Or are
Yeah, so you can certainly follow us at Filmseekers on Twitter. We are on facebook.com/Filmseekers. And if you're into pictures, you can follow us on Instagram, Filmseekers, all one word, once again. And we occasionally post up interesting photos. I think the last thing that I posted up recently was a ton of screeners and DVDs of films that aren't out for another 4 or 5 months yet, which I can spoil for you if you really want.
That is what we want. We don't want to actually watch these things. We're no longer critics.
No, that's right. We just analyze.
And it's been awesome. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for inviting me on. I feel honoured and privileged.
Thank you for showing up. Thank fuck.
Yeah.
Otherwise there'd be a bitching match about Ladybird that would never end.
No, we never complain. This is the fun thing about our shows. We're fine with it. If you don't like something, we're good.
Very true.
It's all good. So, Lee, can we find you online, or do you want to stay covert?
No, you can. At Lee Paul Brady. But yeah, that's it. That is actually just it. I'm also on Instagram, but you're not going to find anything interesting there. Jason?
Yeah, and you can follow Lee also at AtlanticSC, because I am no longer in charge of the Twitter, and I'm having a blast not doing anything. And that's it. So you can follow me on Instagram if you want, Jason B. Michael. I post a lot of sunglasses and Star Wars. You can come. I think my profile on Facebook is public. If you guys want to just look for Jason Michael, go there. I have a show that I'm doing with my daughter called Mia and Jason Drive to School. So yeah, I'm going to be putting up a 4th episode this week. Should be interesting to see. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This has been great. Neil, thanks again. You're going to be a regular, just like Kevin. It's going to be awesome. We're going to bring you on.
Thank you very much.
We're going to have more drinks. It's going to be so
Absolutely.
cool. Thank you very much, everyone, again. Take care, and I hope you guys enjoyed the episode on Mute and Ladybird. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.